President Milei's historic victory on Sunday in Argentine elections means he has a stronger position in his Congress and another opportunity to administer his medicine seeking economic health for a country that has been struggling for a long time. Hans Humes, CEO of Greylock Capital, is a longtime investor in Argentina.
I think the entire country understands what has held them back for decades now. And they're willing to take a certain amount of personal pain. Now we have to see how this transition goes and what the new messaging will come if Peronism is able to prevail in October.
Muchas gracias.
But in the end, Peronism, the populist legacy of Juan Perón, did not prevail, at least not last Sunday.
Los argentinos le dijeron, basta el populismo, populismo nunca más.
I think right now we've made a lot of money based on that election because the bonds have gone up, their whole debt rating has gone up. You know, that election made a lot of money for the United States.
What does Milei's latest victory mean for the country and for investors like Humes? This is how Humes saw the issues brought on by Milei's reforms before the midterm elections.
In general, at the beginning of a pro-market president, you're going to have a lot of enthusiasm. Unfortunately, depending on how this one goes, people might start sensing a pattern that there's, after the burst of enthusiasm and the rally in markets, that something happens where they run into some social resistance or whatever. The feedback I got from sort of my lower middle class friends who are Argentine was many of their friends who are really enthusiastic for change started looking at this and saying, oh, this is the same thing we normally have to do. They either give up or they start turning away from Milei, and they put up with a lot of pain.
Runaway inflation has been a burden for businesses as well. Businesses like the textile manufacturer that David Kim runs in Buenos Aires.
Inflation is a game we really know how to deal with, because inflation in Argentina started in, I think, 1970 or something like that. And we've had inflation, double-digit inflation for many years. It is very difficult because you need to calculate the costs every month, and sometimes you have to, when inflation is very, very high, you have to increase the prices maybe once, or there has been some times when they have to make increases more than one time a month. Everyone that comes to Argentina and we explain all these crises and what happens politically and economically and the taxes and the new regulations, they say we are crazy to stay here. We are used to this. We will be here working in the textile business for many, many years. I think the business owners in Argentina deserve a medal, because it's a very challenging country.
It wasn't just President Milei who had a lot at stake in the Argentine elections last weekend. President Trump had his Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, establish a $20 billion swap line for the country and spend something over $1 billion in the currency markets to support the peso. Fabio Nattalucci became CEO of the Anderson Institute for Finance and Economics after serving at the IMF as Deputy Director of the Monetary and Capital Markets Department.
At this point, there are three plans that have been discussed. One has been a swap line of about $20 billion established by the Treasury with the Argentina Central Bank. There's been reports in the press of FX intervention, so outright purchases of pesos and sales of dollars. And then there is a discussion of another about $20 billion that Treasury seems to be working on with the private sector, presumably to provide some more longer-term funding. This is that's what's in the press at this point.
How does a swap line work?
We can use the Fed as an example here. During the financial crisis, they established, or during COVID, they established swap line with the other central bank. The way it works is the Federal Reserve vis-a-vis central bank of another country, they swap, say, dollars for the currency of the other central bank at a specified exchange rate of some date. And those swap lines can go from 1 day to, say, 3 months maturity. and then at maturity, they swap back, the Fed receives dollars and provides back the foreign currency at the same exchange rate. The only report I've seen in the press has been outright purchases. Outright purchases by Treasury, that's a different exercise. Essentially, they go in the market, they sell dollar, they buy Argentine pesos in this case. But then now, at this point, you own the Argentina peso. So you are completely facing the risk of devaluation of the pesos in terms of investment. Traditionally, there are a few examples in the past where some of this intervention has been done, traditionally with advanced economies. So, for example, in 1998, there were purchases of yen by the US authorities via the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, traditionally. In September 2000, there was a coordinated effort by the Federal Reserve and a few other advanced economy central banks to purchase euros. And then lastly, in 2011, March 2011, during the earthquake in Japan, when the US authorities, they sold yen. Those are all advanced economy central bank. And in the case of the euro, this was a coordinated effort among different central banks to intervene in the market.
President Trump did say that he thinks perhaps the U.S. made a lot of money. I guess it is conceivable it could have made a fair amount of money depending on when it got in and when it got out.
Yes, so if they, for example, got in and purchased right before the election, and then let's say that the appreciation of the peso post-election was like 8.5%. Again, if you apply to the 1 billion, that would be $80 million that you made right there. Now, again, that requires though to crystallize those gains, which means you go back into the market and sell the pesos. If you hold on those pesos for 2 days, where you are this morning, that was a paper gain because the exchange rate is back to where it was essentially pre-election. So if you bought pesos and you hold on to them, you went from gains to back to essentially flat at this point. This is on the outright exchange rate purchases. The swap line, again, because the exchange rate is fixed, there is no gain or loss.
Whether the United States made money or didn't, that was not apparently the purpose for the swap line or the currency acquisition. It was rather to support President Milei and the government in Argentina. Is it likely it could have supported? I've seen, for example, speculation it relieves some pressure for a possible devaluation of the peso.
Right. So, I mean, maybe we can take a step back and trying to start from where the government of Argentina was trying to achieve. So as soon as President Milei went into power, they went into this shock therapy of cutting fiscal spending quite aggressively, and then a large devaluation of the nominal exchange rate. And then after that, they essentially established a ban, the crawling ban, as he said. So the depreciation of the pesos was very controlled and very slow, if you want. Of course, in last year, the economy went into a recession. Inflation was very high, doubled north of 200%, at least quoting IMF numbers that were just released at the October annual meetings. Then the forecast was for this year to the economy to sharply rebound in positive growth territory and inflation to come down. The challenge with this intervention in the spot market and the outright purchases is unless you manage to address the fundamental forces that are driving the exchange rate, those tend to be very short relief, and historically that's how they have been. And so historically the people often talk about the tablita in Chile and Argentina. Those were exchange rate based stabilization plan, devaluation, then slow devaluation of the currency in trying to bring inflation down, and the central bank at some point historically has run out of foreign currency. That was the driving and fundamental forces behind that, and what may have pushed the US to intervene, because the central bank, presumably Central Bank of Argentina, was running out of dollars. Now the question that people have been asking is like, why the US intervene? How systemic is Argentina from a financial stability perspective? Argentina, the US imports trade with Argentina, it's a relatively small number. And so from a trade perspective, there are other countries in Latin America that are much larger trade partners. The other aspect that makes this different than previous rescue package, that was a loan from the US Treasury, was not outright FX intervention the way we're discussing today, but also was combined with IMF, World Bank, and other multilateral development banks intervention package. So the $20 billion of the US plus what was coming from the multilateral development banks went north of $40 billion. So it was not just one country, not just the US for obvious interests. to intervene, was the broader financial community that intervened there. And that was a very successful package. Mexico managed to repay very quickly, already in 1997, so 2 years after that, was able to start repaying and also having access back to capital market. So the crucial question here is going to be whether the intervention in the forms we discussed by the US authorities will be enough to revert some of these fundamental forces that were pushing the exchange rate of Argentine pesos to depreciate. And again, from what we've seen this morning, the exchange rate seems to be almost back to where it was pre-election day.
At least for now, it looks like President Milei will have the opportunity to continue his economic policies, policies that businessmen like David Kim hope will bring both stable prices and growth.
I think the president is doing a great job with inflation. Inflation has come down from maybe 150% a year to 40%. That's very good for everyone. But there are other issues that maybe you don't know about, maybe like the interest rates of banks. It's much higher than inflation. I hope there is a change here. I hope the politicians take into account that everyone is facing a difficult situation right now. The lowering of the inflation is great, but I think we need much more than that. Not only for textiles, but for every kind of industrial company.